criminal. This is disgusting.
So this man, here's the one who we are talking about. He hasn't seen his family in 47 years.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 21 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org. It's not often that a famous think tank invites someone who has killed 300 children to give a lecture. But that's what happened a month ago when Washington's Woodrow Wilson Center invited former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to give a talk. Olmert in 2008 launched what he called Operation Cast Lead, which killed over 1,400 in the Gaza Strip, including more than 300 Palestinian children. A number of students protested his talk. We'll show that. They are primarily from George Mason University. Then two young people from Connecticut who went to Palestine recently, Abigail Cipparone, who went with the First Congregational Church's Tree of Life program, and Dan Fischer, who went on his own mission, and who was on the West Bank and primarily in the Jordan Valley. We conclude with more about Medea Benjamin, who will be speaking in Connecticut July 13th and 14th. She was involved with a protest on June 26th about Guantanamo in front of the White House gates. During the protest, Diane Wilson went over the fence. We begin with the protest against Ehud Olmert at the Woodrow Wilson Center.
For not doing anything, which is not true. But I think, and I said it then, and I still think...
I am appalled that the Wilson Center would host a war criminal such as yourself. But who would be sure that the international community will hold you accountable for your work. What? In solidarity with the Palestinians, all of you should be appalled for sitting and listening to this war criminal. The only threat to Israel is Israel in itself. You're pushing the line farther and farther.
And I always wonder, these guys would heckle me sometimes. Peace with the Palestinians.
I am non-violently resisting your occupation. This is what us and the rest of the American people think of your peace process. To hell with you and your occupation. Free my people and free Palestine. We will never be silenced.
Did I look like a Palestinian?
I'm Palestinian, I belong there. That will never be gone.
He looks like an American, that's fine. Even Americans are allowed to protest, that's all right. We have some Israelis who do it the same way. But,
You are wanted in several countries, and many of you do not know that. This doesn't even explain his war crimes, okay? Look into it. You're a murderer. Shame on Woodrow Wilson for inviting a war criminal. This is disgusting.
"1,400 people were killed in Operation Cast Lead. My former partner was there. It was her job to collect the bodies. She was working for the American Red Cross. She saw Israeli soldiers playing soccer with the head of a 2-year-old child.
Let them finish.
She found a woman's body with maggots crawling out of the bullet holes. You could have prevented this. You could have prevented this. You're a murderer. You talk about peace. You could have prevented it.
Is proud of inviting people to express a broad cross-section of views as the president and CEO of the...
The students who interrupted were quite brave. In California last year, students who did a quite similar action were arrested and found guilty of a crime. Now to Abigail Cipparone, who is speaking in New Haven in May about her recent trip to Palestine. We join her as she talks about water issues.
Debka, the dance that they danced. And then we met with Imad from the Palestinian Wildlife Society, and he described the issues on water. So every week, the Israelis, they have water once a day like any regular American. But for Palestinians, it's much harder. The Israeli government only gives them water once a week. So that day, they have these big water tanks, and they store water in these tanks so that they can use their water throughout the week. And they have a big lack of water. And so then we met with these people living in a cave, and right next door is a well. So you'd think that they'd be the first ones getting the water. But it's an Israeli-run well, so they have no water and no electricity. And this family is a Bedouin family, and they herd sheep, and so they do not have any access to water or electricity the whole year round. This is a settlement right outside of Bethlehem. We saw many of these. They were all over, and yeah. We then traveled to the Tent of Nations, a farm on top of a hill that the Israeli government really wants, because they like to take over every hill so that they can place a settlement on top of it. And this is also a very good military strategy. And you can see surrounding it, there's 4 or 5 settlements surrounding them. So it's very hard for them because along the road, this is a Palestinian farm, and the settlers, when they go on this road, they throw garbage and cans out their windows. So their driveway essentially is littered on. So when we went to the Tent of Nations, their idea is we refuse to be enemies. They have been fighting for their land for years and years, and their family, this is Amal, she's part of the family. Their family, they got a permit a long time ago in the Turkish Empire to keep this land, but the Israelis have been in a legal battle with them for decades, and they've spent $150,000 on legal fees. But they still decide that it's better to not be enemies and be friends. So to help them out, our group planted some olive trees for them. This is one of the youngest of our group, Bella, digging a hole to place an olive tree in. We then traveled to Bethlehem University and met with Dimitri, who described the courses at Bethlehem University and described that they take students from all cultures, Muslim students, Jewish students, and Christian students, and they all learn together. We've then met with Amal, a Bedouin woman who runs the school Bedouin Women for Themselves. When she grew up, their tradition is that she marries when she's 13 and then has a family, but she wanted to become a doctor. So since that never happened, she decided, I want to make that dream true for everyone else. So she made this school for Bedouin women who can go to school and get a higher education, even when it's not traditionally acceptable. And then this is Khalil next to her, and he runs the town El Sira. El Sira is right next door is a settlement, and so the Israeli government believes that they are secure and a security risk. But last year we met with them, and they were definitely not a security risk. So they put demolition orders on all of their houses, saying that they're not allowed to build and that these houses are illegal. So in this town, like, a house gets demolished like once a month, and so many houses, and then they just rebuild. So many houses have been demolished 3 or 4 times.
Who's the third guy there?
Oh, and that's David Good, our minister, who went on the trip. I stayed with a host family with Leah and another girl, Anissa, and everyone that we met was very hospitable, and our host family was amazing. And so this is our like goodbye ceremony for them. We had a nice feast, a Palestinian feast at a restaurant, and I met a lot of great, amazing people there, and I met with many children my age, and it was amazing because they seemed so much like my friends at home, but they live in a different culture, and they have a completely different life than me. And so I've made a lot of friends on Facebook, and so I was talking to one of these boys, and he said, I wish I could go to America. And I was like, oh, of course you can. And he was like, well, I'm not really sure if I can. And I was like, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Of course you can. But then when I realized in my heart that if he can't even get across his town, how can he ever get across his country? Then we went to the Ibrahim Mosque, and we had to cover our heads in respect. And we learned about this is me, and we learned about this man who went into the mosque and opened fire. He was a settler, and he opened fire on the praying Muslims and killed 40 Muslims. And what the settlers did was they buried him and made a shrine for him and said, the man who was killed by the terrorists, even if they stopped this mass murder. And so this just shows how misunderstanding it all is. So right now we were walking in the souk. This is in Hebron. It's a market, and above you is this netting, because in Hebron there is Palestinians living on the bottom and settlers living on the top. So there's like one Palestinian apartment, then a settler apartment. And so the settlers throw garbage and pee on the Palestinians living below. And so they try to use this netting to keep most of the garbage away. This is a woman from the Christian Peacemaker team that we met with. She talked about how they tried to get in the way of conflicts between the Israelis and Palestinians in Hebron and in other places. But their main focus is keeping the children safe, because the children have to go through many checkpoints to go to and from school. And so they try to make sure that the soldiers treat them nicely and everything works great. This is a home, well, there's a big road in Hebron that's only Israeli controlled. So Palestinians cannot go on this road. And right next to these roads are these homes. And so to get the Palestinian children to school, this woman let them go through her house to get to their school. But then when the Israeli soldiers found out that this was happening, that door was cemented. And so now she has to go through this door, down a ladder, and into her apartment, because her main door is cemented. So to keep the children from going. This is the souk, the market that we went through. And these are the children right behind a checkpoint that they have to go through to school every day. We then met with Yehuda Shaul. He is a Jewish man who, after he was in the military, he got out with a bunch of his friends and said, okay, what should we do now? And they decided that they'd seen so many bad things and done so many bad things that they said, something needs to be done. We need to tell people what is happening. So he made this series of documentaries, Breaking the Silence. And he went on tour in the US and went on tour in Israel to show these documentaries. And now he's become an activist for Palestinian rights. And so here he's giving us a tour of the South Hebron Hills. In this tour, we went to Susia, a town that has a very interesting story. When Susia was originally living, the Israeli government came in and said, sorry, you need to move because we think that there's a synagogue under here and we're going to excavate. So they moved, and probably there was a synagogue under there, under a mosque, under a church, under another church, under a mosque, because there's been so many people living there for so long. And so they moved onto their farmland, which was fine, and they lived in these caves. Until one day, the Israeli government came in and said, you don't have any building permits for this, we're demolishing them. And so they filled in the caves with gravel and rubble so that they wouldn't come back, and they drove trucks into their wells to pollute them so that there wouldn't be any water sources. So the Red Cross comes in and says, this is inhumane, we're going to put up tents for them. So they put up these tents, and then a few years later, they're living happily with no electricity and no water. The Israeli government comes in and demolishes them again, saying, whoops, that was an accident, we didn't mean to demolish your homes. So then the Red Cross comes in and puts in more tents. And so now they've been living in these tents for a few years now. There's demolition orders on all of them. But they're hoping that the demolition orders are going to still be like in processing so that they won't be taken down for a few more years. They have now minimal electricity, like 2 or 3 hours every day, because the German government, a few of the German activists put up solar panels. They still have a very big lack of water. And so on this slab of concrete, the people of Susia wrote the date, and then we will never forget. Then we met with Sahar Vardi. She is a Jewish woman who, when she was supposed to enlist in the military, decided with a group of friends that she was going to be a conscious objector. So she wrote a letter to her government saying why she did not believe in going to the army, and she was put in jail for a few months. And so now she's an activist for Jews Against House Demolition and many other groups. This is a man from Cornell University. He now works at the Nazareth Institute. This is a beginning university. They're right now on one floor of a high school. And he talked about how he's doing a Fulbright with Cornell students and Palestinian students so that the Palestinian students can have a good science and math education. So we then went to the Golan Heights, or occupied Syria. And so here is the border between occupied Syria and Syria. And this is really important because in occupied Syria, if you cross into Syria, you can never come back. And people from Syria are never allowed into occupied Syria. So this man, here's the one who we are talking about, he hasn't seen his family in 47 years. Because if he crosses into Syria, he can never come back. And his job and his whole life is here since he's grown up here. But he has never seen his family for 47 years. And he just met his brother 5 years ago, and they had nothing in common. This is a woman from Taibe Beer. She lives in Taibe, and this is one of the main economic sources for this town. They make beer, and so if you ever find Taibe Beer, try it. It's really good, except I haven't had it, don't worry. This is a church we visited. It was built 1,600 years ago, so it's really old. And also, it was interesting because a few hours later, after we left this church, settlers came in and defiled it, and the Israeli government took over Taibe. We then visited with the Parents Circle, and this is Rami Elhamnan and George Saada. In the Parents Circle, it's a group of parents that has lost a loved one to the conflict, Jewish and Palestinian, and they gather together and say that we need to make peace. And their whole idea is that if the people that have been directly affected by the conflict want to make peace, then everyone else should be able to make peace too. And so George Saada's story is he was driving, they were driving to church or to get groceries or something, and so they were passing a security checkpoint, and as they passed, the soldiers opened fire and killed his 9-year-old daughter. And so it turned out to be an accident, and that militants was behind him, and they accidentally shot his daughter and the militants. So this was a big blow to him, and he joined the Parents Circle and is now a big activist in this. And then Rami Elhanan, he is a Jewish man, and his 14-year-old daughter was going shopping, and a Palestinian suicide bomber, he took her life then. And so Rami Elhanan joined the Parents Circle as well, and they have been great activists for peace. This is a man that was in our Tree of Life journey. His name is Derek, and he is from South Africa. And so on one of our many reflections, we had reflections throughout the trip, he talked about how similar the South African apartheid was to what is happening in Israel and Palestine. This final picture is a sign that I've saw many, many times all throughout Israel, but mostly in the Golan Heights. They would place mines in these areas, and then once the war was partially over between Israel and Syria, they would just fence it off and say danger mines. And so people are living near these mine zones, very close to their homes, and children are playing near them, and it's a bad situation. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
So I'm going to be talking mostly about my time in the Jordan Valley. I was in Palestine this past March. I went because I'd been thinking about going to Palestine for quite some time, and everything just seemed to line up. The kids that I tutor were on their spring break. One of my best friends was over in Palestine for the semester, and I had some vacation time that I needed to take before it expired, and so I went. So before I get to my time in the Jordan Valley, I'm just going to talk briefly about my time in the Aida refugee camp in Bethlehem. So this key up on the archway represents the key that Palestinian refugees took with them in 1948 from their homes during the Nakba. The Nakba usually refers to that event in 1948 when 750,000 Palestinians or more were expelled from or fled from their homes, and to this day haven't been able to return, even though they have a right to return under international law. So this is Abu Sabril, who I had tea with. And he left his home in 1948 at 4:30 a.m. because he heard on the radio that Israeli soldiers were coming to the surrounding towns and kicking people out of their homes. And so he fled. He was a beekeeper. He fled at 4:30 a.m. And to this day, he still hasn't been able to return. He thought that he'd be able to go back within 2 or 3 months. And so even though I, as a Jew, can go right now to Israel and become a citizen, even though I don't have any connection to the land of Israel, Abu Sabril, who actually lived there in the town of El Al, can't return. And this is one example of why many people refer to Israel as an apartheid state. This is, oh, and I asked Abu Sabril, what do you think of President Obama? He's coming to Bethlehem next week. How do you feel about him? And he says, I'm not scared of Israel. I'm scared of President Obama, because Israel and the United States government are like this, and he crossed his fingers together. So one of the main themes that I'm going to be talking about is that the Nakba isn't just a historical event that happened in 1948. Actually, most Palestinians that I spoke with considered it an ongoing process, the ongoing Nakba. And you'll see this in the Jordan Valley when so many of the policies that Israel implements there are designed to make Palestinians want to leave so that Israel can snatch up even more land than they already have. I went to the Nakba Resource Center in Bethlehem, and I asked them there, to what extent do you think that the US government, my government, is complicit in the crimes against the Palestinians? And what he said actually surprised me. He said, your government is not complicit, your government is responsible. So that's why I'm speaking here. I think it's just really important for those of us who are Americans to speak out against these crimes being committed with our government's support and our tax dollars. This is the house that someone named Arnett lives in. Now, she had, at the time that the apartheid wall was being built, she had a 13-year-old daughter. The wall is made of these big concrete slabs you can see in the background there. Apparently it's actually built pretty quickly. And so her daughter comes home from school one day and sees that her house is surrounded pretty suddenly on 3 sides by the wall. And so Arnett's 13-year-old daughter started crying, and she says, they buried us alive. So this here this is a settler-only road that Palestinians aren't allowed to drive on. Now, the wall that I showed you earlier, if it was about legality, it would be on the other side of this settlement up here. This is an illegal Israeli settlement built in the West Bank. So if it was about legality, it would be built on the border of Israel, which is over on this side of the settlement. If it was about security, it would be built right next to the settlement. But the wall is actually down here. Can everyone see this wall? The reason is that they want to annex off this whole area of olive trees that Palestinian farmers used to have access to. So in South African apartheid, they called these Bantustans, where they'd push people into close living quarters separated from the means of living. And that's what many of the towns and refugee camps in Palestine have become.
We'll have Dan Fischer's remarks about his experiences in the Jordan Valley on the show next week. Despite all his talk about Guantanamo, President Obama has yet to free even one person that his own security people have declared cleared for release. One of the people leading the charge against Guantanamo is Code Pink's Medea Benjamin, who'll be speaking in Connecticut, July 13th and 14th.
So there's a company that makes these killer drones, and one of them is Northrop Grumman, and guess what? The city of D.C. is about to give $25 million of our taxpayer money to bring Northrop Grumman's headquarters to Washington, D.C. Do you think that's a good use of our money?
On June 26th, there was a significant protest in front of the White House about Guantanamo, involving Code Pink and a number of other groups. I interviewed Medea Benjamin a few days before that demonstration. You can hear it on our website, thestruggle.org. At the demonstration itself, one of the people involved, hunger striker Diane Wilson, scaled the White House fence and held up her hands until she was arrested.
Good street. Eventually, Sergeant Rick had the response team over to help for ASAP. Put the finish line. On the sidewalk, everybody. On the sidewalk, everybody. On the sidewalk. On the sidewalk. On the sidewalk. On the sidewalk, everybody. On the sidewalk. On the sidewalk.
Sidewalk closed. Back up. Back up. Sidewalk closed. Come on. Sidewalk closed. Back up. Back up. Back up. Get off the sidewalk. Get off the sidewalk. Come on. Sidewalk's closed.
Cross the street! Cross the street! Cross the street now! Cross the street!
All the way off.
Cross the street! Cross the street! Cross the street! Cross the street! Non-violence! Non-violence, officers! Get across the street! Move back! Get across the street! Move back! Watch out! Get across! Cross the street, folks! Cross the street! Cross the street! Cross the street! So I'm moving across the street, folks. Gotta move back. Folks, gotta move back.